What's up guys, Josh Mosman here from Motocross Action Magazine. Today is a very exciting day for the MXDN wrecking crew. Why? We get to ride two beautiful bikes. These things are works of art. We have a 1994 Honda CR500 two-stroke and a 2000 Kawasaki KX500 two-stroke. These bikes were resurrected from a long time ago, and Jamie Ellis, he's the one that owns the KX500. Yariv Konski from Australia, he's the owner of the Muc-off Honda team, a longtime Honda guy from Australia. He's the owner of the Honda 500. Nathan Alexander, longtime factory mechanic, he's the one that resurrected these two from the dead, put them together. The guy didn't have any instructions. He had to go through it all on his own and learn how to put these bikes together. They're beautiful bikes. I'm super excited to ride them. My hands are already shaking as I'm just anticipating what it's gonna be like. So the CR500 on the dyno, it shoots sky high, but it kind of drops off pretty quickly. The KX500 on the dyno, what we've seen so far, it's got a long, smooth power. So we're excited to get these two out on the track, compare them back to back, and see what it's like here at Glen Helen. When we first saw these bikes, they were just engines on a shelf at Twisted Development. Many months later, after countless hours of work by Nathan Alexander, our jaws dropped as we saw the final two products roll into the dirt at Glen Helen. These bikes are hard to come by, and it's no simple task to find parts for them nowadays. For most modern racers, the idea of a 500cc two-stroke is not appealing. However, we here at MXA cherish every lap we get to spend on motorcycles like these, and we gain respect for the riders who manhandled these 500cc machines in the past. This video is a comparison of the CR500 and the KX500. However, we do have two separate videos on our website and YouTube channel if you haven't seen them yet, where we go into detail about each individual bike. Diving into this story, Nathan Alexander and Jamie Ellis from Twisted Development wanted these 500 two-strokes to still have that old school feel with a touch of new age technology. We appreciated that the plastics were basically left pretty much stock to keep the vintage look, but we were glad that they upgraded a few of the necessary parts like the forks and the brakes on both bikes. The Honda gained CRF 250 forks from 2018, and the Kawasaki got 2002 KX 250 two-stroke forks on it. They also both used Electron carburetors. They both used FMF pipes and silencers. They both had V-force reeds. Factory Connection built the suspension on both bikes, and they use SKDA graphics to replicate Jeff Stanton's factory 1992 CR500 and Jeff Emig's 1996 Motocross of Nations KX500. Let's get into the comparison of the Honda and Kawasaki 500s. On the scales, the Honda CR500 came in 10 pounds lighter than the KX500. The Honda weighed 238 pounds, while the KX weighed 248 pounds, and that is a massive difference in the motorcycle world. For comparison, modern day 450 four-strokes are in the 220 to 230 pound range off the showroom floor. On the dyno, the two bikes had wildly different power curves. The CR500 power was extremely short and strong, while the KX500 was broad and linear, revving almost 2,000 RPM further at peak. The KX500 was the power king on the dyno, peaking at 58.78 horsepower, beating out the CR500 by incredibly 4 horsepower in total. It just took a lot longer to get there for the KX500, where the CR500 was a lot short and snappier on the dyno. In the torque category, the CR500 offered 47 pound-feet of torque in comparison to the KX500's 45 pound-feet of torque. So more torque for the Honda, but more horsepower for the Kawasaki. To give you guys a little bit of context for these horsepower and torque numbers, comparing them to a 4-stroke, the 2022 Honda CR500 offers the most torque for a stock 450 4-stroke, and it comes in at 37 pound-feet of torque. So comparing 37 to the Honda 500, which was 47, and the Kawasaki 500, which is 45, that is a big difference. Between the Honda 4-stroke and the CR500 from 1994, the 500 2-stroke has 28% more torque. That's a lot more grunt coming out of corners. Comparing the horsepower numbers of these 500s to modern day 4-strokes, the Kawasaki KX500 SR, or Special Racer model, it's their factory edition from Kawasaki, and also the KTM 450 factory edition and the Honda CR500 Works edition bikes, they are all the horsepower kings of the 450 class right now, and they're at or above 60 horsepower off the showroom floor, and that edges out the KX500's 58 horsepower number that we just mentioned. In the end, peak horsepower between the standard production 4-stroke and a discontinued 500 are actually very similar, but like I mentioned, the torque numbers are really where the difference comes into play on what makes these bikes so different to ride on the track. So now, how did these engines and these bikes work on the track? Well, incredibly, the 500 2-strokes felt exactly opposite on the dyno from the track. The dyno told us that the CR500 would be short and snappy, but it was actually the opposite. The Honda CR500 had a broad power band, while the KX500, which we thought was going to be super broad and super long to pull, actually revved up a lot quicker and needed to be shifted constantly. So everyone who saw the dyno charts were very confused, and at first we pinned the blame on Jamie Ellis, saying that he got the dyno charts mixed up, but that wasn't the case. If you watched our 1994 Honda CR500 2-stroke video already, you'd know that the chassis is nimble and fairly comfortable for a 500 2-stroke on that Honda. MX8 test rider Ezra Lewis was able to get very stylish in the air on this bike, and the CR500 is definitely more of a motocross friendly machine. Even though the power curve looked short on the dyno, it was actually broad and smoother and just easier to hold on to on the track. And one of the reasons it might be easier than the Kawasaki is because of that higher torque. Also allowed you to ride a higher gear around the track and lug it more in the corners. The CR500 also cornered well. Although the factory connection suspension was a little bit softer than the Kawasaki settings, it still was more nimble on the track. As for the Kawasaki KX500, its engine and suspension felt more racy than the CR500, and also evident by the video here, we could wheelie the KX500 a lot easier coming out of corners than we could on the CR, just because it had a stronger hit. The Kawasaki's forks and shock were actually quite a bit stiffer, and the engine hit a lot harder, even though it revved through its RPM range quickly. So that actually made the shifting points a lot closer together on the Kawasaki, where we had to shift it a lot more. Yes, we still had to lug the engine to manage it and really hold on to a 500cc bike, but it couldn't be lugged as much as the Honda. Also, the stiffer suspension on the Kawasaki did help us out in the bumps, but the KX500 is taller and heavier than the CR500, which doesn't help its handling. After a long day of riding, we were very thankful that Nathan Alexander grafted on the updated technology with the brakes and forks, because they made a huge difference on the track. We had 4 different test riders, all whose ages range between 22 and 35 years old, and these bikes, they were hard enough to hold on to as they were with updated forks and brakes, so we could only imagine how these bikes would be if they were left completely stock from 1994 and from 2000. Both bikes had their pluses and minuses. The KX500 was lightning fast but harder to control. The CR500 power was smooth and precise, which added to its already agile handling. So in the end, the Honda CR500 was the best bike for us out of this 500cc shootout that we did, because it was the bike that our riders could hold on to the easiest and navigate the bumpy Glen Helen track with the best. Obviously, with more tuning, more testing, more time, energy, and money, both of these bikes could continue to improve, but Nathan Alexander is busy with his Supercross commitments with the Moto Concepts Honda team, and Jamie Ellis is busy building engines for his many AMA Pro race teams that run Twisted Development engines, as well as all the privateers that run his engines and amateur racers that run Twisted engines. So both these guys are busy, and these 500s probably won't get much time on the track after this, at least not for a while. Finishing things up, we want to say thank you to Nathan Alexander for spending practically all of his free time in between building and maintaining Mitchell Oldenburg's race bikes to build these 500cc two-strokes. As MXA test riders, we are spoiled with more bikes than we know what to do with, but it's days like this one when we're able to go back in time to ride some iconic two-strokes that really make this job cool. And it's bikes like these that also really make us appreciate the modern day four-strokes that we get to ride today and appreciate all the advancements that manufacturers and aftermarket builders have been doing to improve the motorcycles that we get to ride. Thank you for tuning in to our 500 shootout video. If you haven't seen the individual videos we did on these two bikes separately, check them out on our YouTube channel and our website. We talk a little more in depth about the parts that went into these motorcycles and a little bit more of the history of each KX500 and CR500. Thank you guys for tuning in. Also, keep your eyes out for a 2022 KX450 versus 2000 Kawasaki KX500 shootout video where we compare the modern day four-stroke versus the old 500cc two-stroke.